A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, Greg Bondar is National Director of Christian Voice Australia. It's a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. Greg Bondar is back with us. Hey, Greg, welcome back to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. Delighted to be here again as usual.
Hey, Greg, you were at the Never Again Is Now rally on the streets in Sydney, fighting anti-Semitism. Give us your reflection of what happened on Sunday.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. It's interesting. An event such as this can bring together Christians from all nations, from all sectors of the community, and I attended with. But the point is that by the number of people that attend, and may I say also Jewish, non-denominational people, and atheists. I spoke to one guy who didn't really very much concerned for religious freedom, and he was very much a person that sort of struck me as saying, interesting that we can bring together both atheists and secular and Christians together. So it was a real moment for me.
Greg, just breaking up a little bit there, and listeners, we'll just persevere a little, because oftentimes if this happens, we get things back happening and nicely, smoothly going. Hey, it was initiated by the Reverend Mark Leach, and he's a Jewish Anglican pastor, and he's got a significant connection here, and he was actually one of the guys who was at the centre of the controversy around that October the 9th rally that was expressions of really what we all considered to be anti-Semitism on the steps there of the Opera House. You know Mark Leach personally, do you? And the Jewish Anglican pastor, and really the front man for speaking to the crowd. What were your impressions?
Yeah, look, very moving, very historical. The point is that it is interesting to see that Christians can come together and be united in a particular issue. One of the things I think the name Never Again Is Now has to be reinforced because, as I said, my two nieces are Jewish, so I have a fairly strong interest in anti-Semitism and make sure that it doesn't occur. I've heard all sorts of stories from my own two nieces of how they've been targeted. So, look, it's unnecessary. We don't need it here in Australia. And it's something that we've got to really fight for. But interestingly, Neil, the point is that, all of this goes against Australian values. And I think everyone needs to speak up and understand that anti-Semitism is just not part of this particular world, and in particular in Australia at the moment.
Anti-Semitism is un-Australian, and there were some incredible speakers at the event. One of those was former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. What were your reflections on his delivery of a speech to the crowd?
Yeah, look, I think very good. He made a very good point, and I don't know if you're aware, but he made the point that, the United Nations, the UN International Court of Justice, actually has double standards by the acts that they've undertaken. For example, what they've asked Israel to do is to, stop the attacks on Gaza. They don't seem to have the same, directions given to other nations around the world. And Scott Morrison made the point that, hey, this is double standard. Why are you asking Israel to act this way when other nations have been free to do as they please? So it's very important that, that point is made. And the other speaker, who you all well know, is Jackie Lambie, Neil. Now, I'll repeat what she said, but the only good terrorist is a bloody dead terrorist. Now, you may or may not agree with that. The point she's making is that he's against terrorism, and in particular anti-Semitism. So it was good to see her support as well.
And interesting, isn't it, that so much of the coverage of what happens in Australia is because of pro-Palestinian marches on the streets. So to have 10,000 people and 10,000 plus, that's the estimate there. 10,000 people turning out, and this is the first of a number of these sorts of rallies. That's very positive, and a lot of Christians are very supportive of getting out on the streets and being part of these.
Yeah, I've I've made a special attempt to email all our capital city supporters to make sure they go to all of these events and support it. It's not so much, Neil, getting out there. It's more about showing that, as Christians, we can walk alongside our brothers, our Jewish brothers, and support them. And I'm sure they would support us. But, I think that's the key element here, that we can walk side by side and show our unity in something that is totally un-Australian, totally against Christian philosophy, and there's nothing in the Bible that says we've got to persecute the Jews now.
Absolutely. Hey, let's move on. There's a number of very interesting topics that you've nominated to talk about this week, and one of those asks the question, is attending a same-sex wedding an endorsement of same-sex marriage? Where do you start with that question?
Well, now, as you know, I preach at a lot of churches, and I recently had a number of questions asked of me, and they were, Greg, our gay son is engaged. Greg, a few years ago, my brother left his wife for another woman. Now they've invited us to the wedding. Greg, my daughter wants to marry a non-Christian. Greg, should we go to the wedding? These are questions that pastors are being asked or being challenged with day in, day out. Now, how do you, as a pastor, as a Christian, answer that? So they're the things that I really want to try and tackle in this particular quick discussion now.
Okay, navigating the complex ethical issues. And interestingly, for listeners who might be thinking about only same-sex weddings there, you've also identified the idea of what might even be called adulterous weddings between two people that, there are biblical wisdom and understandings around those things as well. So yes, it is a complex conundrum that you're actually dealing with.
Absolutely. And you see, as a Christian, how do we decide in light of biblical truth now? What do we actually do? Do we go to a gay wedding? Does that say we're supporting what they're doing? I keep saying, or my wife keeps saying to me, love the sinner, hate the sin. But again, we as Christians have to decide, what does the Bible say? And very quickly now, you and I both know marriage is designed by God. Becoming husband and wife entails a covenant, and marriage is intended by God to be both universal and sacred. So, do you attend a wedding that's non-biblical? These are real issues we're faced with day in and day out now.
Well, this is the real challenge, isn't it? Because if we understand what a biblical wedding is and does and leads to a biblical marriage and the way we raise children, then we're going to have some thoughts around about what actually makes a wedding, and the way that we think of it as a sacred union between two people. So what do you think people are doing when they go to a wedding that they technically, and maybe as part of the essential nature of their own belief and their own being, they actually disagree with?
Yeah, now this is a good question, because you see, if you go through the Bible and that is my source of living, and I have no other source that I use except the Bible. So look at Genesis 2, Neil, where God declares that man's aloneness is not good. So we've created woman, so it's a marriage. And you look at other Deuteronomy 27, Matthew 1:18, 1 Corinthians 7:25-28, all highlight the commitment that people make when they announce that they're going to be engaged and married. So what I want to ask everybody else is, if you're attending a gay marriage, a same-sex marriage, are you actually endorsing that marriage? Well, I suspect that you are, Neil, because, pastors have got to realise that if you attend such a ceremony, you're actually endorsing the behaviour in the fact that you're saying, well, I'm going to this wedding, I see what they're doing, and I'm okay with it. Well, I'm not okay with it. It's a real challenge. I'll keep praying about it, but until then, it's a real challenge for me now.
And it might be a challenge too when you think of certain responsibilities, as you say, and there are a number of churches now that endorse same-sex weddings, and that sort of leadership just shows perhaps a false direction when it comes to the biblical wisdom on weddings. So certainly there's that speed, isn't there, when you've got Christian leaders, pastors, priests, who are endorsing these weddings. But then it comes down to ordinary people who are sitting in the pews and how we might think of that, because if we're led down the path that perhaps our leaders are going, because, hey, if it seems all right to them, it must be all right. Somehow or other, you've got to come back to the Word of God, haven't you, and be able to discern from God's Word as to what might be right and wrong.
Absolutely. Now, see, when you attend a same-sex marriage, you're not just attending, you're actually hearing God's Word being spoken. So hopefully the pastor that's delivering the marriage vows understands that, this is not biblical. So therefore, it's a real challenge for all of us. And I do pray for the people that are in a same-sex marriage relationship. But that said, I just think I would not have a clear conscience if I attended a same-sex marriage, Neil, but I'll keep praying about it.
I couldn't help but thinking, knowing we would talk about this, the thought that you might be attending a same-sex wedding and they're endorsing it. But if the couple who are engaging in the wedding know that you don't endorse it, you actually might be a thorn in their side, because they think that they've got people at the wedding who are actually, counter to the sort of values that they're trying to promote. So there might even be a two-way thing that happens there. But then maybe if if they didn't think you'd endorse it, you might not have got the invitation to the wedding. So there's all sorts of different dimensions there.
Absolutely, and you and I both know, traditionally in the wedding, the priest or the minister or the pastor would say, "Does anybody object to this wedding?" I know I would put my hand up, Neil.
Okay, and you know what? That might take a little bit of backbone to stand up and say, "Well, I'm here, but I don't really endorse this." That's a challenging thing, isn't it? And you know what? There might be some things we could settle on, and it might be good for a longer conversation again around these sorts of issues. But that might be for another day, because I've got some other great things that you've been wanting to talk about, and one of those is historic churches. Do you sell them off? Because, hey, they're now sort of artefacts of the past, and maybe they cost a lot to keep on going, but or do you save those because there is a heritage there that is something very valuable? What are your thoughts here? Historic churches, sell or save?
Yeah, good question, Neil. And as you know, I was in France last year, and I spent a lot of time at Notre Dame, and that visit renewed my interest in historic churches. There is a church down in Melbourne, for example, St Kilda Presbyterian Church. It is 1885. It's immense. Now, it's going through the process. Do they sell? Do they modify? Do they get a donor in? What do they do with it? Now, I would put every effort into trying to keep the historic church. You've got things like history, you've got the architecture, you've got the organ. I don't know if you've seen some of those organs, but they are absolutely beautiful. And there's a reverence about some of these historic churches, Neil. I would like to keep them, and I know the conflict that St Kilda Presbyterian Church is going through at the moment, but, Neil, what do we do? How can we make sure that we keep them? And the only way we can do that is by getting a very generous donor to ensure that they continue to serve God through their church.
And there's going to be a little bit of a division, isn't there? There are going to be those that say, well, the church is the people. It's not the building. Forget the building. And then there are others who say, well, there's a stake in the ground here where, there's a monument to God. There is an expression of believers. There's something that reflects our Christian heritage, and that needs to be preserved, not just for the current generation today, but for the generations that are to come. So there is going to be division there, and maybe you fall one side or the other, but if you do fall on the side of maintaining that heritage project, perhaps, yes, digging deep and contributing to the cost of the upkeep, because that's where the challenge is.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. No, I totally agree with you. You and I both know that the church is people. It's not the building. But in this instance, the point I want to make is that, do we knock down Notre Dame because church is people only? No, you don't. To me, it's a landmark. It is a symbol of what, people have done in the past, and where you can express your faith. I'd love to keep these historic churches, and I hope that St Kilda Presbyterian Church in Melbourne, for example, continues. I know some other churches around the country that are absolutely beautiful. With the architecture, they still have pews. And, Neil, I love them. Let's see if we can keep them. And, I'd be interested to see what other people think, but I'm all favour of keeping them maintaining them, Neil, despite the cost.
Hey, Greg, before I let you go, just one really important issue, and you're in Sydney as we talk today. In Sydney, the MP, Alex Greenwich, has introduced what's called the Equality Bill, and there's something like 20 provisions of change in legislation for New South Wales, a 50-page bill. Some people call it an omnibus bill. There's lots of dimensions there and all very anti-Christian. Any thoughts here around what's happened with that bill? Because I know it's coming towards debate and even a vote as early as the 14th of March. Thoughts here?
Yeah, correct, Neil. Look, it's been again pushed ahead of other bills. What's happening here is it's the 14th of March set down for debate. I hope it doesn't go to a vote. We've sent communication to every MP in New South Wales saying, hey, you can't rush a bill like this. It has consequences. I think the Archbishop Tony Fisher made the point that there are significant unintended consequences that we have to look out for. So let's not rush the bill and make sure that it's not 14th of March is a debate, not a vote.
Well, there's still lots to monitor along with that debate as that is planned to get underway, and of course the potential for a vote there on what is significantly anti-Christian. Greg Bondar, thank you so much for another great update. Greg's National Director of Christian Voice Australia, a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. The website to connect with Greg Bondar, christianvoiceaustralia.blog. christianvoiceaustralia.blog. Greg Bondar, any special live stream events coming up anytime soon?
There certainly will be, Neil, but I'll keep it just quiet for the moment. But in March, I've got a very, very important overseas person I'm interviewing, and I'll talk to you about that next time we meet.
And for listeners who've been part of some of those webinars, christianvoiceaustralia.blog, how you connect there. Greg, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Yeah, God bless you. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.